Paid my brother's hospital bills without blinking, but when my sister demanded a penthouse, I said no, and my mom threatened to disown me. I didn't raise my voice, I just listened. And then I walked away. They say I'm cruel for giving up on my family. But can you really give up on people who gave up on you first? I never expected things to end like this, with silence and a final blocked message. But maybe I should have. Maybe I should have seen it coming years ago. I grew up thinking family meant unconditional love, that no matter how different we were, we'd always be there for each other. I believed that for most of my life, and I held on to it hard. But when your sister sees you as an ATM and your mother weaponizes guilt like it's her native language, it changes things. So yeah, I helped my brother because he needed it. He'd do the same for me. But when Tina called me acting like I owed her a luxury condo just because we shared DNA, I realized something was deeply broken. And for the first time, I didn't try to fix it. I let it break. Before everything went wrong, I would have told you my family was everything to me. I was the oldest, the responsible one, the fixer. It wasn't a role I chose, it was just what the family needed, and I filled it without complaint. Dad was calm and logical, a man of few words but deep values. He worked hard running the family's logistics business and made it clear he wanted us to live better than he did. Mom was the opposite, emotional, intense, unpredictable, but when she was kind, she was radiant. Her approval felt like sunshine. I spent most of my early life chasing that warmth, afraid of the cold that came when I disappointed her. David, my younger brother, was my partner in crime. We were barely 2 years apart and we did everything together. Bike races, late-night cartoons, even sneaking snacks before dinner. When he got appendicitis at 11 and was scared of the hospital, I stayed by his bed the whole night. I told him stories and held his hand when the nurse came with needles. That's how close we were. No one had to ask me. I just showed up. Then Tina arrived. I was 8. She was this unexpected burst of joy for my parents. And from the minute she was born, it felt like everything shifted. Dad softened with her. Mom, she became obsessed. Tina was her little queen. And while I still mattered, I was helpful and dependable. Tina was the one who made her light up. I'd never seen Mom laugh the way she did when Tina did something as simple as burp. But I loved Tina anyway. I changed diapers, made bottles. When she was old enough, I taught her how to tie her shoes and zip up her dress. I skipped high school dances to babysit. When she had nightmares, she didn't run to Mom, she came to me. I was the second parent, really, and I wore that badge with pride. Even in college, I made choices with them in mind. I picked a state school so I could be closer to home. I majored in business, not my dream, but something practical, because Dad said it was smart. I took summer jobs and sent money back. When David struggled in his first year, I drove 4 hours to help him study for finals. When Tina wanted to study abroad, I helped her prep her portfolio and paid for a prep course. Then came the storm. Dad died suddenly, heart attack, everything imploded. Mom fell apart, she became distant, sharp-tongued. But I stepped in again. I flew home and took care of the funeral, the estate, and the bills. I cooked, cleaned, and organized meetings with lawyers. David helped, but Tina was a mess. She wouldn't get out of bed. I tucked her in like a child and whispered that everything would be okay, even when I wasn't sure it would be. Afterward, I offered to stay a few more weeks to help Mom. She said no, not kindly, more like, go back to your real life, we're fine. I left confused but grateful for the little things. I thought we were still okay. The years that followed were quieter. I called, but they didn't always answer. I sent gifts, flowers for Mom's birthday, and books for Tina. Rarely got a thank you, but I shrugged it off. Family doesn't keep score, right? Then one Christmas I visited home. The house was different. Colder, my room had been turned into a storage space. Tina acted like I was a guest. Mom complained I was too quiet, too serious, too distant. I left early and cried the entire flight home. Still, I kept trying. I paid Tina's rent once when she lost a freelance client. I covered David's dental surgery when he was between jobs. I sent Mom a new phone when hers broke. I did these things without ever being asked, without being thanked either. Looking back, I realize I was loving them the way I wanted to be loved, quietly, fiercely, without conditions, but it was never mutual. I was a utility, it was useful. And the moment I stopped being that, the truth came out. The signs were always there. I just didn't want to believe them. Or maybe I did see them, but convinced myself they didn't matter. That's the thing about families. We excuse the things that would be unforgivable from anyone else. It started subtly, like background static. One birthday, Mom called late in the evening. "Oh, I thought I already sent you a message," she said. "Anyway, happy birthday." No card, no gift, not even a video call. The same year, Tina posted a lengthy tribute to Mom on her Facebook for Mother's Day, complete with old photos and hashtags. I'd sent flowers and called in person. Mom never responded. But she commented on Tina's post with heart emojis and "best daughter in the world." At first, I thought maybe I wasn't doing enough to stay connected, so I tried harder. I called every Sunday, even if the conversations were short and awkward. I sent holiday cards with personal notes. I offered to fly Tina out to visit me, promising to pay for everything. She said she was too busy with client work, then tagged herself at a beach resort with friends that same weekend. Then came the passive-aggressive jabs. "We just wish you'd relax more," Mom would say. Or, "Tina's always been the creative one. You were always practical." I was praised for being useful, never for being me. Tina, meanwhile, became bolder. When I mentioned I was thinking of buying a place, she scoffed and said, "Well, yeah, you make enough to afford it alone. Not all of us want to sell our souls to a corporate job." She said it with a laugh, but her eyes weren't joking. Once she posted a meme on Instagram that read, "Older siblings equals emotionally repressed control freaks." Her caption, "Don't at me, just facts," Mom commented with a laughing emoji. David texted me a screenshot and just wrote, "Yikes." That Thanksgiving, yeah, the one where I showed up uninvited, was when it really hit me. The look on Mom's face wasn't just surprise, it was inconvenience. As if I'd disrupted some perfect image she had built without me in it. Tina came to the door with a wine glass in hand and said, "Did you not get the text? We're keeping it small this year." I stood there, gifts in my hands, David beside me, the air so thick with discomfort I could barely breathe. We turned around and checked into a motel. That night we ate gas station turkey sandwiches and watched reruns on cable. David said, "This is the weirdest Thanksgiving ever." But I could tell he was trying to make me laugh. I appreciated the effort. Later, I found out from an aunt that Tina had told everyone I was too busy to join. I had literally booked time off months in advance, but no one asked for my side. Still, I clung to hope. The following spring, when David had to get surgery on his foot, I covered the extra costs. His insurance didn't. I didn't think twice. He tried to refuse, but I insisted. A week later, Tina called me and said, "Since you helped David, it's only fair if you help me too. I found a place, a penthouse downtown. I can cover half. You'll take care of the rest, right?" I froze. The entitlement in her voice wasn't even disguised. When I said no, calmly, without anger, she lost it. "You're such a hypocrite," she yelled. "You pretend you're all about family, but you only help the people who kiss your ass." Mom called not long after, not to ask for my side, but to scold me. "You're playing favorites," she said. "If your father were alive, he'd be ashamed." I asked her why she thought it was my responsibility. She said, "Because you owe us for everything we gave you." That sentence echoed for days. What did I owe them, really? My success? My peace? My boundaries? I was no longer confused. I was exhausted. The roles had shifted, and I wasn't the daughter anymore. I was the ATM, and every time I didn't give, the interest rate doubled in guilt. The truth was undeniable. I wasn't being loved. I was being used, And the longer I allowed it, the more they believed it was their right. It all came crashing down on a random Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting in my office, bouncing end-of-quarter reports when my phone lit up. Tina. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. We hadn't spoken in months, at least not beyond a cold group text or a forwarded meme. I should have let it ring, but I didn't. Hey, big sis, she said, too cheerful. Her voice had that artificial sweetness I'd come to recognize as a red flag. Got a sec? I'm at work, I said, glancing at the clock. Can this wait? It's quick, I promise, she jumped in without pause. So, I've been looking at apartments, real grown-up stuff, and I found one I love. It's perfect. Rooftop patio, floor-to-ceiling windows, a doorman. It even has a spa on the second floor. I waited. I can cover half, she said like this was a casual shopping trip, but I need help with the rest, just a loan or, a gift, since you helped David with his surgery. I blinked. You want me to pay for half of your penthouse? It's not a penthouse, she snapped. It's a condo, a comfortable one. I can't live with mom forever. It's pathetic. I'm almost 30. And your solution is to ask me to pay for your independence? He bristled. David didn't even ask for help and you threw money at him. If David was recovering from surgery and between jobs, you're shopping for a skyline view. It's the same thing. I exhaled slowly. It's really not. Then she exploded. You know what? I knew you'd do this. You always act like you're so generous, but only when it makes you look good. You don't care about family, you just want control. I said nothing. She hung up. 20 minutes later, Mom called. I didn't even get a hello before she started shouting. How dare you humiliate your sister like that? I rubbed my temples. I didn't humiliate her. I declined to fund her fantasy apartment. He's devastated. She came to you vulnerable and you made her feel worthless. She asked me for tens of thousands of dollars. And you're rich, Mom snapped. What's the big deal? Family helps the family. There it was again, that twisted logic that love was currency and I was the ATM. I stayed calm. You raised me to work hard and be independent. That's what I did. Why is Tina the exception? Because she's different. You mean she's your favorite? Mom went silent. Then if this is how you treat your own blood, maybe we don't need you. The call ended with a click, but it echoed louder than any fight we'd ever had. I sat still for a long time, my phone screen black, my heart hollow. I wanted to cry, but couldn't. Instead, I poured a glass of wine, stared out the window, and let the silence settle. That night, I told Jackson everything. He listened, didn't interrupt, just reached over and held my hand. She messaged me, he said finally, your mom, on Instagram. He showed me the message, a long guilt trip masked as a concern. How I had blocked her, how Tina was emotionally shattered, and how my decision had fractured the family. I reread the message 3 times. The next day, I blocked them both. Phone, email, social media, everything. Then came the backlash. Relatives called, not to ask how I was, but to suggest maybe I had overreacted. It's just money, one cousin said. It's not worth losing your mother over, said an aunt. She's your sister, she's struggling. But no one asked if I was struggling, if years of being invisible had left scars, if being needed but never nurtured had worn me thin. David, bless him, was the only one who got it. They're mad because you stopped playing your part, he said, and they don't know who you are without that role. That was the part that stung. They didn't know me, not the real me, just the version that gave, without question, that showed up no matter what. I remembered every ignored call, every time I flew home to a cold welcome, every birthday they forgot, every time I'd brought news, good or bad, and been met with indifference. And suddenly, I wasn't sad anymore. I was done. They hadn't just asked for money, they had tested the limit of what I was willing to give. And when they found it, They decided I wasn't family anymore. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was quiet, calculated, and complete. And it cut deeper than I expected. A week passed before the dust even began to settle. I thought the silence would bring peace, but instead it brought waves of guilt. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because of how easy it had been for them to throw me away. I kept checking my phone, half expecting one of them to reach out and say, let's talk, but they never did. And with every passing day, the weight shifted from guilt to grief. Not grief for them, grief for the version of my family I'd believed in, for the loyalty I thought was real, for the love I thought was mutual. There was an old photo of us on my fridge, me, David, Tina, and Mom at the beach. We were laughing, wind in our hair, faces sunburnt and happy. I stared at it one night until the tears finally came. I didn't cry for the people they were now. I cried for who I thought they'd been. What followed was the slow, painful acceptance that the relationship I had with them was transactional, and once I stopped paying, the contract expired. People don't talk enough about emotional betrayal within families, how it can feel worse than heartbreak, how it rewrites your entire history. I started questioning every memory. Did she ever love me the way I loved her? Did Tina ever see me as anything other than a backup plan? I talked to my therapist about it. She said something that stuck with me. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away, not to hurt them, but to protect yourself. So I walked, not with rage, not with revenge, but with resolve. Told David I didn't want to go to any family functions where they'd be. He said, then I'm not going either. That meant more than he'll ever know. I untagged myself from old family albums online, removed Tina's photos from my apartment, packed away the guilt and shame in a metaphorical box, and sealed it shut. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. Not all freedom comes from running. Sometimes it comes from releasing what no longer feeds you. They betrayed me, and yet I'm the one who finally set myself free. For a while, I convinced myself that I was fine. I kept waking up, brushing my teeth, going to work. I answered emails, smiled at meetings, and even laughed at unfunny jokes. But every task felt mechanical. Inside, I was heavy. I wasn't sad in the usual way. I was vacant, like my insides had been scooped out and filled with fog. People talk about heartbreak in romantic relationships, but they rarely talk about what it feels like when the people who raised you, who said they loved you unconditionally, turn their backs on you for setting a boundary. There's a unique kind of devastation in that. It makes you doubt everything, your memory, your character, your capacity to love. I stopped calling friends back. Every conversation felt like too much. What would I even say? My mother basically disowned me because I wouldn't buy my sister a penthouse. It sounded ridiculous, but it wasn't about the penthouse. It was about how fast they abandoned me the second I said no. I told myself they were just hurt, that maybe they'd come around, but as days turned into weeks and the silence held firm, I started to wonder if they ever intended to. Sleep became elusive. I'd wake at 2 a.m., drenched in sweat, heart racing, replaying old arguments in my head. What if I had said it differently? What if I'd just given her the money? Was it worth this? Jackson tried to be there. He'd rub my back at night and cook for me when I forgot to eat. Once I found him folding my laundry, something I usually did alone, and I burst into tears, not because of the laundry, but because someone had seen I was unraveling and quietly tried to help. I hated feeling weak. I hated that even though I had chosen this, it still felt like rejection, like I had failed a test I didn't know I was taking. Sometimes I stared at the ceiling and asked questions I couldn't answer. Had I been a bad daughter? Had I made too much of my own success? Was I arrogant, cold? But then I'd remember the times I stayed up with Tina when she had fevers, the money I sent home during college, the months I spent organizing Mom's life after Dad died. I hadn't been cold. I had been committed. Maybe too committed. The pain became a quiet companion. It sat with me during lunch breaks, followed me to the gym, and hovered behind my eyes at weddings and birthdays. Everything good came with a shadow. I felt like I was moving through water. Everything slowed, muffled. One day I came across a voicemail from Mom, an old one from years ago. She was thanking me for something simple, buying groceries, I think. Her voice was soft, affectionate. For a moment I felt 14 again, desperate to make her proud. I cried in the car for 10 straight minutes. David came by one evening with pizza and beer. We didn't talk much, but halfway through a rerun of some dumb comedy show, he turned to me and said, "You didn't do anything wrong." I nodded, but I didn't believe it yet. I started writing, not to them, but to myself. Journals filled up quickly, pages and pages of anger, confusion, and hurt. I wrote about the times I felt invisible, about Thanksgiving I wasn't invited to, about the group texts I was left out of them, about the coldness in Mom's voice when she said, "Maybe we don't need you." Huh. Writing helped. So did therapy. Slowly, I started to see the patterns, not just in them, but in me. How I had made myself small to fit into spaces that didn't want me whole. How I had equated love with usefulness. How I feared that if I wasn't needed, I'd be forgotten. The breakthrough didn't come like a lightning bolt. It came like morning light, gradual, soft, undeniable. I realized I didn't miss them. I missed the version of them I had created in my mind. The one where Mom would apologize, where Tina would say thank you, where we'd laugh over wine and forget the damage. But that version wasn't real, and grieving it was painful but necessary. Because once I stopped waiting for them to change, I finally had space to change myself. I wasn't there yet, not fully, but I had stopped blaming myself. I had stopped waiting for them. And in that stillness, something like hope began to grow. Hope that I could be okay, even without them. Healing didn't arrive like a dramatic revelation. It came in fragments, quiet moments when I started choosing myself again. The first shift happened on a Sunday morning. I woke up before my alarm, sunlight pouring into the bedroom. Jackson was still asleep, one arm curled around my waist. For the first time in months, I didn't feel dread. I didn't feel empty. I just felt. I got up and made coffee, standing by the window in silence. I watched the city move, slow and steady. There was peace in that. And I realized I hadn't thought about Mom or Tina since the night before. Not out of avoidance, but simply because they weren't the center of my mind anymore. That was new, and it felt good. I started saying yes to invitations again. Small things at first. Lunch with coworkers, a book club I'd ignored for months, a hike with an old college friend. I didn't tell them everything, but I let them see me, the real me, the one who didn't have it all figured out. I spent more time with David. We cooked together on weekends, went to farmers markets, and talked about life without tiptoeing. He told me his magazine was finally gaining traction. I could see it in his eyes, the passion, the fire. It reminded me that we were still building something good, even without them. Work became more than a distraction. I threw myself into a new project, spearheading a financial literacy initiative for women-led startups. It gave me purpose. It reminded me that I had the power to help people who actually wanted to grow, not just take. One afternoon, after presenting a workshop, a young woman came up to me and said, "I've never met someone who made numbers feel so empowering." That sentence stayed with me because for so long, I thought my worth was tied to what I could give my family, but here was someone seeing value in what I did, not because they needed me, but because they respected me. Jackson noticed the change too. One evening, we sat on our balcony, wine glasses in hand, and he said, "You're coming back to life. It's beautiful to watch." I smiled. I thought I had to choose between being strong and being soft. "You don't," he said. "You just have to be you." That night, we talked about our wedding. For a while, I had debated whether to invite Mom and Tina out of obligation, out of nostalgia, but after everything, I knew my answer. No invitations, I said, not even to be polite. Jackson nodded. I'm proud of you. It wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. And the truth was, they didn't deserve to witness the joy they tried to break. I redecorated my apartment, took down the last of the family photos, not out of spite, but to make room for new memories, ones I chose, ones that felt like home. I still had bad days, moments where I'd see a mother and daughter at the grocery store and feel a pang, or when someone asked, "Are you close with your family?" and I had to find a polite way to say, "Not anymore." But those moments didn't define me anymore. They passed, and I let them. I built a new rhythm. One is grounded in choice, not obligation. I chose who to love, who to trust, who to let in. And most importantly, I chose myself, not the version of me they needed, but the one I had buried for too long, the woman who was whole, even if bruised, who knew how to rise, not with fire, but with grace. Healing wasn't loud, it wasn't cinematic, but it was real, and I was ready to keep going. Around this time, I started journaling differently, no more angry letters. I wrote about things I was grateful for, tiny moments, the way Jackson made me tea without asking, the way David sent me photos of his dog in ridiculous outfits, the quiet pleasure of finishing a novel on a rainy afternoon. I kept a list on my phone called Proof I'm Growing. It included things like didn't check their social media for a whole week, said no to something without guilt, a laugh until I cried, I slept 8 hours, told someone I needed space and didn't apologize for it. It sounds small, I know, but each item was a milestone. Each one reminded me that growth isn't always a dramatic transformation. Sometimes it's just choosing not to bleed for people who wouldn't even hand you a bandage. I started planning our wedding with excitement, not hesitation. I picked a dress I loved, not one I thought would impress anyone. We chose a small vineyard an hour out of the city with string lights and wildflowers and room for dancing under the stars. I sent out invites without a second thought. I didn't flinch when I left their names off the list because I had finally learned that family isn't who shares your DNA. It's who shows up, who roots for you, who sees your mess and stays anyway. And as the big day approached, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The kind that wraps around you gently and whispers, "You're home now." Not in a place, not in a person, but in yourself. The week of the wedding, I felt everything at once: joy, nervousness, disbelief, and something I couldn't name until it hit me in full force. It's grief. Not the kind that knocks you down like it did before. This one was quieter, more like a shadow. It came not from regret, but from finality. The reality was that they wouldn't be there. Not Mom, not Tina, not even a text, not even a passive-aggressive gift. I had spent so long imagining them showing up, uninvited, trying to steal the spotlight. But now, as the chairs were arranged and the wine chilled, I knew they weren't coming. I had blocked them. I had said no. And this was the consequence of that choice. It hit hardest the night before during the rehearsal dinner. Jackson and I were surrounded by people who loved us. David was giving a speech that made everyone laugh, and my college roommate brought out an old photo that had us in tears from laughter. And still, there was a gap, an empty chair in my heart I hadn't prepared for. I snuck outside after dessert, needing air. The vineyard was quiet. Stars like powdered sugar scattered across the sky. I leaned against the railing, closed my eyes, and let it wash over me. That's when David found me. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice low. I nodded, then shook my head. I thought I'd be past this by now. "You're not supposed to be past it," he said. "You're just supposed to feel it and still move forward." I let his words settle in. He continued, "You did the right thing, and doing the right thing doesn't always feel good, especially when it means letting go." I hugged him, not the polite kind, the kind where your ribs hurt after. The next morning, I woke up early, heart pounding, but it wasn't fear, it was clarity. Today was the day I was going to stand in front of the world and say, this is the family I choose. Not because of obligation, but because of love. I walked down the aisle to soft acoustic music, David by my side. Jackson's eyes met mine, and suddenly everything else disappeared. There was no absence, no ache, only this moment. We laughed during our vows. I cried during his. When the officiant said, "I now pronounce you," my heart felt like it might burst. We danced under fairy lights, ate too much cake. I lost count of how many times people said, "You look radiant." And for once, I believed it. Later that night, I took a photo with David, just the two of us, arms around each other, smiling into the camera. It became my favorite photo from the entire day because that wasn't just my brother. That was my family. A couple of days later, we returned from a short honeymoon getaway. There was a message waiting for me. Not from Mom, but from my uncle. He said, "Your mother has moved out of the old house. She and Tina are living together in the penthouse now. She said she has no daughter anymore." It didn't hurt like it once might have. Instead, I laughed, not cruelly, just with a kind of relief. Because she was right. She doesn't have a daughter. She has a memory of someone who used to bend until she broke. That person doesn't exist anymore. I told Jackson everything. He listened, held my hand, and said, "You're free now." He was right, but freedom, I was learning, didn't mean forgetting. It meant accepting that you could carry the wound without letting it bleed you dry. It meant letting your story grow beyond the people who tried to write it for you. And it meant choosing every single day not just who you love, but who you become. That day, I chose me. At night, as we curled up together, Jackson whispered, "This life you're building, it's yours now, entirely." And I believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of thank you cards, returning rentals, and settling into our new rhythm. But beneath the logistics was something deeper, a shift that had taken root during the wedding and now bloomed like spring after a long, bitter winter. I no longer needed their approval. I didn't measure my worth by their recognition. That was the biggest change. Sometimes I'd still get flashbacks, a memory of Mom brushing my hair, or Tina laughing with me on the swings when we were kids. And I'd allow myself to miss that version of them. But then I'd remember, those people weren't the ones who stood beside me when I needed them. And nostalgia wasn't enough to justify the pain. David came over one evening with a box of our dad's old things. "Thought you might want these," he said quietly. Inside were letters, photos, and a few handwritten notes our dad had left behind. Reminders that once we came from someone who tried, even if he didn't get everything right. I kept one note by my desk. It said, in his scribbled handwriting, "Character is what you do when no one's watching." It reminded me why I had walked away, why I had chosen truth over comfort, why I didn't regret a thing, not the silence, not the distance, not even the loss. Because of that loss, I had grown roots, and now I was blooming. About a month after the wedding, the email landed in my inbox. Subject, urgent, from your mother. For a moment, I thought about deleting it unread, but curiosity won. I clicked. It wasn't just an email, it was a manifesto. Mom said she'd reflected deeply and decided she didn't want to go to her grave with bitterness. She said family was everything, and maybe she had made mistakes, but I had too. She wanted to start fresh, to heal as a family, and maybe we could meet somewhere neutral, like lunch or coffee. I stared at the screen, not angry, not sad, just tired. Because this wasn't healing, this was a PR move, a desperate bid to rewrite the story after I'd stopped playing the role she assigned me. I didn't reply. 3 days later, Tina messaged David, "Mom says Sloan won't respond. Can you talk to her?" He sent her a one-line reply, She has nothing to say to you. After that, things got louder. Mom posted a family photo from 10 years ago with a caption that read, "Even the strongest families can fall apart when some members forget their roots." Relatives started calling me, guilt-laced voices asking, "Can't you just talk to her? She's your mother." They didn't know the full story. They never had. So I told it, not in a cruel way, but with clarity. I wrote a long message and sent it privately to those who asked. I explained the years of favoritism, the financial manipulation, the gaslighting, the way Tina mocked our careers, how Mom cheered her on. I told them how they laughed when I cried, how they vanished when I needed them. And I ended it with, "I'm not cutting off family, I'm cutting off abuse. If you can't see the difference, maybe I need to cut you off too." Some stopped replying, some apologized, some surprisingly thanked me. The facade was breaking. Then came the bombshell. David called me one afternoon. "Uncle wants to meet," he said, "it's important." We sat with him in his office. He looked older than usual, more tired. "I need to show you something," he said, pulling out a file. Inside was a legal document. Mom had tried to pass voting rights in the company to Tina again behind his back. "But I thought she gave that up," I asked. "She lied," he said. "She's using loopholes, trying to influence board members. I need help stopping her." I felt the old anger rise, but underneath it was something else. Resolve. "I'll testify," I said. "If this goes to court, I'll speak, so will David." He nodded. "I was hoping you'd say that." The weeks that followed were chaos. Lawyers, emails, statements. It felt like reliving every wound, except this time, I wasn't powerless. When the hearing came, I wore a navy suit and no makeup. No theatrics, just truth. I told the board everything about my father's original wishes, about Tina's lack of qualifications, about the manipulation. They listened, and then they voted unanimous. Tina's rights were revoked, my mother was issued a warning, and my uncle retained full authority. We walked out in silence, but as soon as the doors shut behind us, David grabbed my hand. "You did it," he said. I didn't feel triumphant, I felt free. Not because I had won, but because I'd finally stopped trying to prove anything to them. I was done, truly, completely done. That night, I sat on the balcony of our apartment, glass of wine in hand, city lights flickering like stars fallen to earth. I thought I'd feel victorious, vindicated, but what I felt was something purer, liberation, not from them, but from needing them. And then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. No words, just an old photo. Me at age 6, sitting between my parents on our front porch, face smeared with ice cream, smiling like the world was perfect. Underneath, one line, "We were happy once." I didn't respond, I didn't block it either, because it didn't matter anymore. Jackson came outside and wrapped his arms around me. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "For the first time in a long time, yeah." We stood there for a while, listening to the quiet hum of a city that had moved on. Just like me. In the weeks that followed, I focused on my work, on Jackson, on planning a trip to Italy with David, on living. People still ask sometimes, "Have you heard from your mom? Do you miss her? Do you think you'll ever speak again?" My answer never changed. I don't know. Because healing isn't always a clean break. Sometimes it's jagged, uneven. Sometimes you don't get closure, you just get stronger. And that was enough. More than enough. It's been nearly a year since the wedding. Life is quiet in the best way. Jackson and I adopted a rescue dog, a goofy black lab named Moose who insists on sleeping between us every night. David's magazine is gaining traction. He got quoted in a major publication last week, and we celebrated with wine and burgers on our balcony. Sometimes I catch myself waiting for the other shoe to drop. When things are this good, it feels like the past might come knocking, demanding to be let back in. But It doesn't. Not anymore. The truth is, the storm passed, and I'm still here. Stronger, softer, a little more scarred, a lot more whole. When people hear my story, they often ask, would you do anything differently? And the answer is no. Because everything, the tension, the silence, the confrontations led me here. Every moment I stood up for myself was a brick in the foundation of the life I'm living now. The hardest part wasn't cutting them off. It was accepting that they were never going to be who I needed them to be. Letting go of the fantasy was harder than letting go of the people. But once I did, I had space to build something better. I learned that family isn't made by shared blood, but by mutual respect, effort, and presence. It's David showing up with soup when I have the flu. It's Jackson texting thinking of you in the middle of the workday. It's the way Moose thumps his tail against the floor every time I walk into a room. That's family. And I know now that protecting my peace doesn't make me cold, it makes me honest. There's power in walking away, not out of anger, but out of clarity. When you realize someone won't change, the most loving thing you can do for them and for yourself is to stop waiting for them to. I still keep that note from my father on my desk. Character is what you do when no one's watching. It reminds me daily that boundaries are not betrayals. That sometimes strength looks like silence. Sometimes healing looks like absence. And that I don't owe anyone access to me just because they share my DNA. The girl who used to cry in her room wondering why her mom loved her sister more, she's gone. In her place stands a woman who chose herself, and I wouldn't trade that for the world. Sometimes I wonder if Tina ever thinks about me, if she ever looks around that penthouse and realizes it was never hers to begin with, that everything she clings to is built on favoritism, not merit. She lost a sister while trying to win a crown no one else was competing for. Maybe one day she'll realize, maybe not, but I've stopped waiting for apologies that will never come. The beauty of peace is that it no longer requires permission from people who never wanted you to have it in the first place. I wake up every day with gratitude for my husband, for my brother, for Moose, for the quiet, for the life I built when I stopped building for other people. And if anyone ever finds themselves in the place I once stood, in the middle of obligation and resentment, trying to decide whether to stay small for the comfort of others or grow into someone they respect, I hope they choose growth. Even if it means leaving people behind. Because sometimes to find your place in the world, you have to walk away from the one you were born into. And that's not betrayal, it's rebirth.